This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. The Browns schedule has come out, and I've already broken down the schedule. If you're interested, that video came out yesterday. So if you're interested in that, make sure you click my logo and go on to my most recent videos and you'll see the breakdown there. So, but this isn't going to be a breakdown of the schedule. This is going to be a list of 6 interesting things that I think this schedule for the Cleveland Browns has taught me, not just about what the NFL sees the Browns as or what the Browns are going to need out the season, but also just about the NFL in general. And the first thing that I noticed with this schedule and almost every other schedule that has been released is that Monday Night Football is the new Thursday Night Football. Now, this is way more significant than it sounds because it does signify a seismic shift in where these giant entertainment entities like the NFL are going to be looking to have their games broadcast, and on what traditional platforms are they willing to go to. But it is notable that now Monday Night Football seems to be the bottom tier national TV game. We all know that the NFL requires every team to have a national TV game. For years, the mediocre teams and the mediocre matchups were reserved for Thursday Night Football because it was either on like NFL Network or it was on like a streaming service. It was always seen as this, it's kind of a national TV game, but it's not really a national TV game. So you didn't get the best matchups on Thursday Night Football. But look at the Monday Night Football schedule. Smells like old Thursday Night Football. And that's significant because then you look at the Thursday night schedule, which used to be the bottom rung of the NFL. Like the reason we have all the Thursday night game jokes aren't because Thursdays are an inherently bad day to play football. And there's arguments against that, but it's usually because the slate, the games that you play are usually awful. It's usually like, oh, the third place Browns are playing the last place Bengals or something like that on Thursday Night Football. But look at that slate. It's changed, right? The Browns and Steelers play on Thursday night, and the Browns and Bengals, which the NFL expects both those teams to be good, play on Thursday night. And it's just better matchups across the board for Thursday Night Football. But Monday Night Football, you're getting shit like the Commanders and Browns. Like, I can't explain how that's in that. Or the Browns and the Broncos, I think, are a Monday Night Football game, right? Like, can't explain that. Really can't explain how that's a national TV game other than, well, they needed a national TV game. And they would rather have that game be attached to a team they feel like is going to be good down the stretch than just a mediocre division game. And that means ESPN is at the bottom tier of the pecking order for these national TV games. And it's no surprise at the top of the tier is NBC. NBC gets first pick at all the most premium games that they want because they have Sunday Night Football. Sunday Night Football is universally seen as the most important spot of the week to play a football game. And there's no doubt about it. The NFL and NBC are both invested in making sure that's the number one spot to play a football game. And then you have their other network broadcast partners in CBS and Fox who have those 4:30 spots, and they get extra benefit because they don't really count against the national TV slots because they're technically not national TV games. So they can put as many Cowboys games on there as they want. But they get a good chunk of that pecking order, right? They get the Browns and the Cowboys and all these other great matchups on network TV. And then after that used to be cable, right? ESPN, NFL Network. But that's changed. It's now streaming is in front of cable. Streaming to the NFL, at least, It has overtaken relevance versus cable. That's not insignificant, right? When you look at the media landscape of the NFL, that's usually where things are going with other sports league and other media. I know that WWE has signed a massive deal with Netflix for WWE Raw. Like, that's also another industry that's usually ahead of the curve when it comes to new technologies and embracing them in a way that will be embraced for everybody in the future. And I think we just got to get used to the reality that in the next 10 years, live sports will live on network TV and streaming, maybe cable, But the days of like ESPN and TNT and all of these like cable entities really having a good grip on national sports, that's starting to go away, and it's starting to go away much faster than people think. So keep an eye on that, right? Like as these cable companies and these cable channels rapidly lose live sports to streaming, and ESPN getting, and like ESPN even has it on ABC, like they're quasi network, but they're not. They're even getting the boot to streaming right now, which it's interesting. It's interesting. But yeah, Monday Night Football seems to be the new Thursday Night Football. And I'm just interested to see how ESPN reacts to that as the years go on, as people start to catch on. Because I promise you this right now, not that many people are talking about this right now. Not that many people are talking about this. But wait till we get to midway through the season. This will become a talking point about how bad Monday Night Football has been this season. And people will talk about it as if they don't know why. But the reason why is they're getting awful matchups. Awful matchups because they're clearly at the bottom of the pecking order. And this didn't just start this year. It kind of started last year too. It's kind of been ever since Amazon bought the rights to Thursday Night Football, but it's been happening slowly but surely. This is the first year where I'm like, damn, Monday Night Football definitely isn't the place to be at for a national TV game anymore. Like, you'd rather have a Thursday night game. It feels like a bigger deal at this point because that's what the league is indicating to us. So that's something to watch there with Thursday Night Football and Monday Night Football. Number 2, I think the schedule makers expect the Cleveland Browns to be a good team. I think that's the second thing that I learned from this whole schedule release. A lot of the Browns' best games are geared towards the back of the season. A lot of the Browns' national TV games are geared towards the back of the season. That usually indicates that they feel strongly about the Browns' ability to be good. Now, it also might mean that they're not super confident in the Browns' ability to be good because they're not investing like a lot of mid-season national TV games on them, right? Like right before the deadline to be able to switch these games up for national broadcast. So that's something significant. The Browns have a Sunday Night Football game in week 16 or 17, which again feels like they feel like the Browns should be a very good team, but we'll see if the Browns live up to that. Same thing happened in 2019, so you can't take it too seriously there. Number 3, this is what I learned from the third thing I learned from the schedule releases. I think the Browns defense can, if need be, and I hope it doesn't have to be like this, but if need be, the Browns defense can carry them through the first 6 weeks. In the first 6 weeks of the season, the Browns play the Cowboys, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Washington Commanders, and the Philadelphia Eagles. I think 2 of those teams you would think you would require like a significant contribution from the quarterback position in order to win. Maybe 2 of those games. I'm talking about Philadelphia and Dallas. It's possible that against Dallas, you might not need a crazy output from the quarterback position, depending on other things that happen for you in that game. But definitely against Philadelphia, you don't want to go in there feeling like you can't score points, right, offensively. But that's even all the way back until week 6. If you look at the first 5 weeks of the season, you could easily see the Browns going 4-1 in that stretch without getting significant contributions from the offensive side of the ball, which I do think is significant, right? You want a large margin of error during that part of the season because you want to win these games, but you also understand that you have a new offensive coordinator coming in, and you want to make sure that there are no excuses by the time you get into the meat of this schedule for Deshaun Watson. You want him to be able to finally put together like 6 good games as the starting quarterback of this team and string them together, so there's no excuse of rust or anything that can happen here, or anything that can get in the way of you doing what you need to do after week 6 of this season. And you can go through those growing pains, I guess, of having a new offensive coordinator, while also winning games, right? Like, even if the offense has a hard time showing up, I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns got out the first 6 weeks of the season at 4-2 or higher. And if that's where you are when you're kind of struggling and you get the offense together, you can really take off after that. But definitely something to watch there, because it's something that you want to see at the beginning of the season. Something I talked about the Browns really needing from the schedule makers. Number 3, number 4. The way the schedule is laid out, I think it's very possible that a lot of people won't be sold on the Cleveland Browns if they win, right? Let's assume the Browns are winning. That's the biggest part of this thing. Let's assume the Browns are winning. If they have a great record, I think it's very possible that people really won't believe the Browns are real until after this 3-week stretch, this 4-week stretch they have from December 15th to the end of the season. Because the first stretch of tough games that you have in this season is Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Los Angeles. The problem with that stretch of the season is, one, it happens in October, and we don't weigh things that happen in October that heavily in November and December for whatever reason. But we don't weigh those things as heavily, right? The Browns' win against the San Francisco 49ers wasn't carried with the same weight that it would have been if they would have won that game like in the later part of the season. It's something that you have to remind people that the Browns did all year. But like the Browns beat the 49ers with PJ Walker, and like we didn't talk about that as much as the Browns beating the Baltimore Ravens in November with Deshaun Watson, right? And that's kind of the difference I'm talking about, where it's just weighted different once you do it at the end of the season. So one, that stretch happens early in the season. It's possible Philadelphia could be a shit show again. The Cincinnati Bengals, if you beat them, everybody acknowledges that they're a good team. The problem is that everybody also acknowledges that the Browns seem to have whatever it takes to beat them every time they play them. And it doesn't really indicate whether the Browns are going to be a great team for the rest of the season. It just indicates that the Browns can beat the Bengals, which they've consistently done, especially at home. Now, if you beat Baltimore, I think people will take that one serious. But again, that's beating Baltimore in Cleveland. It's not going to be taken as seriously as beating Baltimore in Baltimore. And in the Los Angeles Chargers game, we have no clue what them Chargers going to be like. It might look like a good win in week 9 and turn into a regular win by week 17, because maybe the Chargers fart out for the rest of the season. So that stretch before the bye week, like even if you get through it 3-1, 4-0, I don't think people are going to take it as seriously, just because when it happens and the opponents that you would have to beat and where you would beat them. The next stretch that I think would be a prove-it stretch for this team would be week 15, week 16, week 17, and week 18, which obviously means it'd be the end of the season. And this stretch would be undeniable if the Browns had a 3-1 run or a 4-0 run in this stretch, because you're playing at Cincinnati on the road on Thursday night, one of the most difficult situations you can be in. You're also playing Kansas City in Cleveland. So if you beat Pat Mahomes home or road, people take that seriously. The Dolphins on national TV is something that people are going to take seriously. Another thing that affects that early stretch and why it won't change perception that much, even if the Browns play well, I don't believe any of those games are on national TV, except for maybe the Cincinnati one. No, the Cincinnati one's not on national TV. All of these are Sunday at 1 o'clock kick. So nobody's going to be watching them relative to the general NFL audience. So this one, you beat the Chiefs, everybody talks about it. You beat Cincinnati on national TV, everybody talks about it. You beat the Miami Dolphins on national TV, everybody talks about it. And if you beat Baltimore at the end of the season, which could be on national TV, everybody talks about it. The Browns will dramatically shape their perception in the final 4 weeks of this season, positively or negatively. They could come into that part of the schedule with a great record and be taken less seriously by the end of it, or very seriously by the end of it. They could be either Super Bowl favorites by the end of that stretch, or a team that people have deemed unserious by the end of that stretch. Either could be the case, but I don't think we're going to have a definitive word or feeling on what this team is nationally, at least, until the end of the season because of how the schedule lays out. It's very possible that the Browns could have a great record that people aren't going to take too seriously just because of how the schedule laid out. Because again, national TV games matter for the national perception. And also who you play and where you play them also matters. And what time you play them also matters. So that's going to be, that last 4 weeks of the season is a real prove it chunk for this Cleveland Browns. If they want to be taken seriously as contenders, they have to go 3-1 in that stretch, which will be very tough for them, because even if they have a great record, they go like 1-3 or 2-2 in that stretch, they're just not going to be taken seriously going into the playoffs, which might matter to some people, might not matter to others, but it will be something that we'll talk about for sure. Another thing that I learned, the fifth thing that I learned out of these 6, run defense is going to be critical this season. I heard a lot of talk about the quarterback angle of this and how the Browns are playing so many good quarterbacks. I ain't really buy into that. One, yes, you play Pat Mahomes, but you lucked out because you do play Pat Mahomes in December, which means that it's possible that weather could really affect that game. And that means that Pat Mahomes might be taken out of that game because of the weather. So maybe it's not going to be a throw heavy type game for Pat Mahomes. Other than that, you're either playing really good quarterbacks that you're familiar with because they're in your division, or you're playing these quarterbacks who are good, but they're not Pat Mahomes, and you're playing them at home, right? Dak, Trevor, Tua, you get them all at home. The road schedule isn't that intimidating, which I'll get into in a second. But yeah, all of the quarterback stuff I thought was a bit overblown. I think the quarterback angle for this team, that they'll be able to hold up, or they should be able to hold up if they stay healthy. But the run defense angle is serious, right? You're playing the Eagles, who just brought in Saquon Barkley. You play the Baltimore Ravens 2 times a year, who always have a great run game. You play the Chargers, who brought in Jim Harbaugh, who's going to try to have a great run game there. You play AK-47 in the Saints. You play the Pittsburgh Steelers twice, who like to run the ball, especially since they ain't got no quarterback no more. The Kansas City Chiefs, man, Isaiah Pacheco, gonna run that thing, right? So that's another team. And then you had the Miami Dolphins, who, look, everybody talks about that passing attack, and it's gonna be late in the season when you play Miami. That's gonna be in Cleveland, so it might not come down to that rushing attack similar to the Kansas City situation, but it could come down to that run game. So I think that's going to be another thing to watch, is that this run defense has to be improved from what it was last year. Can't be as manipulatable as it was last year. And the Browns going to have to show up on the run defense front, because that's where they're going to get tested the most this season, I think, is on the run defense side. The last thing that this schedule taught me was, I think our road slate is much lighter than it was last year, right? You get a road game versus Jacksonville. Now, it's playing in Florida in September, which could be tricky, but it's important to note that Jacksonville is much more like Georgia in September than it is like Miami in September, because Jacksonville is in the panhandle, or closer to the panhandle of Florida. So it's not crazy heat that you're dealing with. You don't play Miami on the road. You get to play Miami at home, and Miami on the road in September is vicious. Yes, you go west for the Las Vegas Raiders, but I think the Raiders are one of the worst home teams in the NFL over the last few years. Also, I just don't think the Raiders are that good. So I'm fine with it. You do come back to the East Coast to play the Commanders again. It's a 3-game road trip that should be pretty daunting, but it's early in the season, one, so you're not worn down going through a 3-game road trip. Two, it's not a West Coast road trip like it was last year where we played like 2 California games and a Denver game. It's not that. So that 3-game road trip is much less daunting. You go west first, you come back home, you play the Commanders in DC, and then you play the Philadelphia Eagles in Philly. So outside of that one travel trip to Las Vegas, everything else is a bus ride or at least a quick flight away. So that's not bad for a 3-game road trip. So even in that, you lucked out. You go to New Orleans, which, I mean, this isn't like the Drew Brees Saints, so that's not going to be too daunting of an environment. At Denver is always a little tricky, and then you have your road division games, which are always tricky, but I think this is a much lighter and much more manageable road slate than what you had last year, and I think the numbers will reflect that. I think part of the reason the road defense, home defense thing was such a big difference is because the Browns had a West Coast road schedule last year. I think that's one of the things that people kind of omit from that whole road defense, home defense, on top of all of the turnovers and all the points that got scored when the starting unit wasn't on the field. That kind of added to that. But I think the fact that this team had a West Coast road trip and had a lot of West Coast road games last year really affected the performance of this team on the road. And this year they have a much easier road schedule and a much more manageable road schedule when it comes to travel. So I think they'll be able to manage that well. I think there'll be a better defense on the road. Now at home, it's a tougher schedule, and I don't expect the home numbers to be exactly what they were last year. There's no Clayton Tune on the schedule, right? Or no team that looks like what some of them road games might be a Clayton Tune-ish situation, right? Like we talking about Aiden O'Connell or something like that. But you know, these road games like Denver might be something where you can jump onto, but like Kansas City is a home game. You have your division home games. You know that Dak's going to be good. You know that New York might be something too. But nonetheless, my whole point here is that your home schedule is a little bit tougher than it was last year for sure. Your road schedule is much lighter than it was last year. And I think we might even see a little flip of dynamics where the Browns might be a better road defense this year than a home defense, because that's just kind of how the schedule lays out. And maybe that's what we should really take into factor when we talk about like, oh, they're a better defense on the road or home. I don't think it has as much to do about the actual environment itself and more about the situation. Are they playing a bunch of West Coast teams? Are those teams that they're playing on the road much more difficult than the home opponents outside of the division? Maybe that had more of a factor, but those are my thoughts. Those are the things that I learned from looking at the schedule. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below, or what you learned from this schedule in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.